Okay, so on to the negatives. Okay, so Parsons and functionalists in general are often criticized of being quite naive. Okay, so when you're thinking about functionalists, whether it be Parsons or Durkheim or another one that you've looked at, always think, how are they maybe neglecting something? Because they often are neglecting something, and Parsons is no exception to that. Okay, so we mentioned this earlier, but his studies were based on middle class American families and nothing else. Okay, he conducted a relatively small study, realistically, considering he was making very wide assumptions about the family as a concept. Okay, so trying to apply it across the entire world, he only studied middle class American families, hence the emphasis on the nuclear family. Okay, so it's not necessarily going to be applicable to every family, every culture across the world. Okay, and his views are very biased. Okay, based on his study. Okay, equally worth noting that his study was done in 1959. Okay, I always say, do think about the date that these case studies were sort of conducted, because 1959, I don't know if you know this, but it was a little while ago. Okay, so it's definitely worth noting that it might not be applicable in the modern era. And as we know from the Rappaport study, families are much more diverse now than they ever have been. Okay, so is this theory still relevant? It's questionable. Okay, so that's the first thing to note. Okay, and arguably the more important criticism of this study is it's very naive in the fact that it doesn't really acknowledge the dark side of the family. Okay, it's a bit of a sordid note, but we all know that it's true. Okay, domestic abuse and female oppression, it happens. Okay, especially in situations such as this, where Parsons was studying the American family in the 1950s, and women weren't having such a good time at that point. Okay, they were very domesticated and weren't really allowed to have any independence. Okay, so this study is really ignoring the fact that female oppression and domestic abuse are a part of society, sadly. Okay, and that he doesn't make any accounting for that. Okay, his view is very idealistic. Okay, it's a very idealistic view which can be applied to some families, don't get me wrong, but it ignores some really critical things that make this theory somewhat, one, naive, and two, potentially irrelevant. Okay, so you can really dig your nails into this case study. So you can obviously explain it. Okay, you need to know it fairly well. You need to know what the two functions are at a base level. Okay, but the great thing about this theory is you're able to criticize it. And why that's so good is that you get a lot of marks in 12-mark essays for the amount of in-depth analysis and evaluation that you do. Okay, so if you're going to evaluate anything, this is a very good place to start. Okay, a very good place to start. So don't forget that that this is here for you. Okay, as always, don't forget that these case studies need to be filled in as well as possible. Okay, and any further questions, any at all, do drop me an email. Okay, thank you guys.